computer.
Oh, right.
Okay. Totally good.
So where we're sitting now is where we're sitting on the recording. Yeah.
Good. Yeah, we can always deal with that through whatever, Dropbox or whatever later. Yeah, so after the introduction, I was just mentioning the meeting with ACM. It was all very good. They all seem very proactive at doing it, but obviously, like Elon Musk says, it's one thing to make a car, another thing to make a car factory. So we're obviously working with them to make a car factory. So we have to do the workflows, and thankfully in this group we have Mark and Peter, who understands issues of reality of BibTeX better than anyone. By the way, I'm reading a history of Renaissance printing today. Ooh. And there was a quote from Amerigo Vespucci, the guy who gave America its name. And he did actually say, there is a difference between theory and experience. I think we have a lot of experience, so I thought of you guys. Anyway, so they're going to be implementing Visual Meta in the simplest possible minimal form, which is fine. And Mark and Peter are helping them with the realities of how the BibTeX should be formed.
Yeah, and it's interesting. It's unsurprising, but actually, even if all that results out of the ACM test is a self-site going with a document, actually that's quite a big win, because it means that anything, whether it's with the ACM or somebody else, we can start from the thing of saying, okay, so in a sense we've got past the stage of why do it, and then we can begin to discuss the interesting things that Jiri and Peter and things are discussing in terms of giving it rigor, which is the obvious sort of next part of it. But I could really tell from that meeting that I sat in on that, to have put that up front and center would have just derailed the whole thing. It obviously has to come, but if we tried to serve them the whole pie at once, I think it would have probably not taken. So actually, it's pretty positive at the moment.
Yeah, exactly. That's also how I see it. There are, of course, other interesting issues we can look at ourselves, but that's one thing. And also, I had a meeting yesterday with Vint and Ismail, and Ismail is inviting some very interesting people, including Gordon Brown, which I'm happy about. So, but that's for the book, just to segue onto that for a moment. And I think we have enough people in the book for the second volume to not have to think about that anymore.
How many people do you have? Do you have a number, Frode?
No, please look at the website.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, I got stuck. Being in the wilderness in Norway sounds very high tech, but no, it's kind of the opposite. But anyway, back in London tomorrow. Then easier to be responsive. Can you say anything there, Raphael? Did you see also Barbara Tversky said yes, phenomenal writer.
Wow.
I'm checking it right now.
And Stephen Fry gave his contribution this week as well, so that's also good.
Nice.
Great.
Yeah, and so on.
Another useful thing that I rummaged up on a slightly different axis was that by dint of, that usual thing, you think, well, shall I write to this person? They'll probably go straight in the bin. I wrote to someone who'd been writing about some BibTeX tools, who came back with a whole flood of emails almost by return, which is interesting to find that in the darkness of a corner of the world online, there are some people still thinking about BibTeX and trying to make it more robust, which is actually rather useful for us. Early days, yes, and I won't sort of flood information over everyone, but it was just a really nice thing to find. That there was some expertise out there, and more so with a mind to actually making things better and more robust and more usable. So that was that was really good.
Very, very good. But also on the opposite side of very good, very bad, I think I actually have to go. Will you excuse me, guys, and we have a full meeting on Monday? I'm really embarrassed and sorry.
That's fine. You're traveling,
Yeah. Just sorry about this. Being on a kind of a family holiday is not always a holiday, if you know what I mean. Adam, I think you know exactly what I mean, by the way. Okay, so have a good chat. I will watch the recording. Somebody will probably give it in Dropbox, and I'll put it on YouTube, and we'll watch it that way. Yeah.
Yes,
Indeed.
I'll do that.
Cheers, Frode.
Okay. Okay. Thanks very much. Okay. Bye, guys. Have a good
Bye-bye.
weekend.
Yeah.
You too.
So I was thinking, Raphael, in counterpoint to the fact that last couple of discussions have probably leaned rather heavily in the technical direction, steering things back to some of the things that sort of you're working on with Frode, are there any gaps there or things that we could all help to contribute towards in terms of some of the presentational things?
Yeah, so I was waiting for the meeting to happen to ask, there will be a presentation at the end of the month, right? Regarding visual meta.
Yes.
And
My best guess, well, I think it's, I'm not sure if I wrote it down, but I think my best guess sitting in the meeting was that probably at best we'll have a self-site in a VM wrapper attached to everything at publish. More realistic is we'll have probably still just that much, but attached fairly soon after. So in other words, at the time the presentation's there, it may not be done simply because it's apparent that the BibTeX production process rolls off the back of the paper creation, and there wasn't time or space to go into it. Plus the fact that I think, in fairness, that it's a classic thing that those at the top saying wonderful, those actually closer to the sort of the machine, with less agency are all thinking, oh crikey, well, what does this all mean? Though I think we've given them something that's sort of doable. There's a really interesting thing. I didn't note it in the conversation, but there's a quite noticeable number of papers are submitted in Word, which means someone's actually got to do an extraction from that. And an interesting thing that came to mind from that is one of the things our community could start to think to do is, maybe one thing would be really useful to do would be to have a plugin for Word that just created BibTeX from the references. I suspect it's very doable because most people using Word are probably using Reference Manager, and somewhere in the background, formatted information is being shuttled around. But of course, if things turned up with, information that didn't have to be yet again re-extracted and reformatted, it probably would make life much easier for those in the more of things. But yeah, I think definitely there. So we may not be able to see it as we're listening to the presentation, and probably what we'll need to do is allow for the fact that exactly what's in the VM might need to be written quite close to the wire when we actually see what's signed up for. But my gut feeling is I'd be very surprised if it didn't go sort of ahead at all. And when I reflect on it, even if it's just a self-site, that's actually kind of a win, because it puts VM out there, but in a way that then lets us say, well, that's fine, but actually on its own, that we need to build some robustness around it. We need to have error correction. We need to have these other things, which I think works quite nicely for some of the things that folk like Peter have been talking about in terms of working towards the December Doug anniversary that Frode mentioned.
Got it.
So I think those two things can go along in parallel, even if they appear to be disconnected at this point.
So the one right now in August,
Yep.
we're probably going to present only what's going to be implemented, the simple version.
Yeah, and I think, but I think what we can do is, I think it's absolutely fair to indicate some of the richer things we've thought about. So we're doing this because pragmatically,
of course,
this is as much as it's reasonable to do in the short time we had, and without putting people to a lot of extra effort.
So
but we're conscious that in its full form, it will need these extra affordances around it.
Exactly.
Because very interestingly, one of the things that came up, actually, funny enough, talking to the ACM was, well, what do we do if we have a correction or something? So well, we've actually thought about that. I mean, at the moment, but they do have really interesting things that I hadn't, that obvious after the fact is, so things like pagination. Well, does the visual meta become a page or not? The answer is, well, no, it probably shouldn't, because then short papers become long papers just by dint of their page length and things like that. So there are some interesting wrinkles. And I know, for instance, ACM at the moment, if they have to do a correction to a paper, I think effectively the website just points at a new version of the paper rather than it being version per se. It's versioned in another way. So there's some interesting scope to align those sort of behaviors in a way that makes it actually robust for everyone, hopefully themselves included. There was also a thing like, when they provide an author's copy to someone who submitted, does it come with VM on the end? And there was so they might be offended. I mean, our suggestion in the conversation was, well, if you explain what it is, that basically this is going to make it easier for people to cite their work. I think few authors will complain, but it remains to be seen. And in the same as that was sense of, well, print on demand. If they do a print on demand paper for somebody, does it come with the VM or not? That was sort of left open. My thought is, well, if it doesn't come with the VM, we're rather snookered. If it comes with the VM and it's an unpaginated thing, I mean, I think where this is going is that if this has mileage, people will start to think about how you structure PDFs. So you have, for instance, non-default print sections, which is really where all this is headed. There's stuff that you ought to be able to print out, but if you're just trying to print out a paper, you won't want to print out the VM, because realistically, we're printing it very small. So if you really wanted to read it, you'd have to copy it, embiggen it.
Yeah.
Anyway, so anyway, there's a few of the wrinkles that came through, and I think the presentation can allude to these, because I think it's in our interest, and it sells it better that we show that we're actually thinking some distance beyond what we're doing as a pragmatic first thing out of the gate. Got it.
So a couple of things that are written down just right now is it's going to be important, to start with what is visual meta, and then after that, the first implementation, and then we show examples of the first implementation, and then future possibilities, and then we tell people we have prepared a FAQ, and then we can talk to Frode to putting a FAQ on the website so that people can access it. And also, we now have a Twitter handle for the future of text, which is going to be great for people to send questions via Twitter, and we can answer via Twitter as well.
That's great.
And then those questions can then be added to the FAQ on the website.
One more sort of download before I shut up. Let's get a word in edgeways. Is that I think also I'm coming to see that I think a useful thing is also to help for those who can't see it for themselves, to point to the long picture, especially for the publishers, that part of the gain in the round is as the clean citations they're creating now come back around the circle as known clean citations, their job of handling citations should get easier. And especially in areas where there's, a lot of the citation is within a closed field. So obviously we don't get that advantage today, but it was quite interesting when our conversation sort of strayed into that area. I could sense people were perking up and say, oh, that's interesting. So I think it is worth pointing out the long game as well, even if it's not apparent to everyone in the room that that's really where this gets us when it's fully done.
Got it. So after what it is, we should talk briefly of why it's important, and then that connects to maybe a closing of possible use cases and how it helps citations and all academic documents and things like that.
Yeah.
I don't want to jump in front of anybody else, their other comments, but
go ahead, Adam.
Do jump in.
All right. First off, Adam, the Twitter thread in there is a lot of really cool interfaces that are timeline based and perhaps inspiration for anybody to look at as far as different ways to potentially visualize the metadata that we've been talking about. Similar note on the interface and perhaps even the public face of things. don't know if you are aware of the changes in GitHub, but if you go, I think in most browsers, maybe it's just Chrome though, if you go to a GitHub repo and hit period, you will be surprised. It will launch an IDE for you, and it's a beautiful moment
I
in
saw
the
that
history
this
of
week.
GitHub. Yeah, what I love about it is, as a quick sort of information theology, if you will, aside, is that, you know, that we're getting to a place where you can have the content totally separated from the presentation layer. And that's really exciting. So that in addition to reading a book called Designing an Internet by David Clark, who worked for Vint and would be an excellent person to have in future texts. It got me thinking, this is where I'm finally getting around to the point. Has there been a talk about you know, treating this visual meta for a moment as if it was like the internet? Like, do we have has there been a talk about separation of concerns, and specifically around this segment of concerns is not the concern of visual meta. We will leave something open for other people to figure out and plug in and do whatever. Some of the back and forth in the emails kind of reminded me of that, or made me wonder how much is being optimized quickly, you know, in order to make forward motion versus what is actually going to solve this problem for years along, even if visual meta is not a complete solution. So more just a question of the group, and for Frode, have you thought about, and for Vint even, the separation of concerns? That is it.
Go ahead, Mark.
I mean, I have a thought on that, because in a sense I've been mulling on as well. I'm beginning to see there are almost sort of 2 or 3 parallel threads running here. There's a very pragmatic effort to just get sort of VM out of conceptual space into reality, and that means throwing, in a sense, seemingly a lot overboard. All it actually, in my mind, means delaying it. And there's some sort of technical stuff to do, which is about robustness, which will, you know, bore the pants off half the assembly and excite the other half. But that doesn't matter. It's all necessary stuff that needs to be done. I think there's an interesting separate part, which sort of is, again, depending on how much of an overview, you know, if you're a big picture person, it's all part of the continuum. If you're more someone who likes to take a localized view, they seem quite separate. This idea of what we can do with all this data, as opposed to the fact that, you know, what VM is a nascent attempt to get to the point where we have the data that allows us to do a lot of the nice stuff we're talking about. And I'm quite happy. My view is to leave that as loose as we can, because it just frightens some people. So rather than force them to deal with things that they can't hold in one place, is to just let, at this early stage, let the things all run along in parallel. So we certainly need to be thinking about it. I suspect it's not the kind of things to hit up publishers with out of the gate, simply because they will be thinking on a much more pragmatic level, like, how long does it take? What does it cost? You know, who's going to do this?
Yeah, no, but that's excellent framing. That I think it would be great to get agreement across the board. For instance, we don't see visual meta as an internet or a protocol. It's more like Ajax. You know, it was a thing that was a Band-Aid at a time to get to the next point, knowing that it'll hopefully be replaced by, you know, a more thorough, yeah.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, my most pragmatic, I'd say all we're doing is we're putting a deliberate stumbling block there. So people get so fed up tripping over it, they build something better. But they're not going to build something better until we force them into it. And you know, and realistically, there's lots to poke fingers at in the way of putting the visual meta together. But you know, I think the consensus is that when you step back, it's about the best thing we can do from a bunch of bad options. but where it has value is it gets us towards a point where we begin to have a sensible conversation about the richer things that we can do if only we had, you know, clean and reusable data to rest upon.
Fantastic. Take that quote, put it at the top of the Twitter feed.
And that point you brought of that visual meta is, you know, it's data that we can use later, and then the cases for this data are going to show up in different areas and in different complexities as time goes by forward, right? So
Yeah,
maybe 5 years down the line, what could visual meta do?
yeah, and this is like a case in point. I was talking to someone the other day, and I showed him the visualizations that Adam had done, and he was sort of saying, "But that's not using visual meta." And I'm thinking, okay, so you're not a big picture person. But if you just abstract, imagine if the data, instead of being just, you know, a CSV table underneath it, was perhaps even being drawn dynamically out of structured data that could be read, that was robust, that was verified, had provenance.
Yes,
You could still do this.
I love that word.
Well, and I know, I mean, I without wanting, because some people say it's way too technical already, I am aware that there's a whole, there's XML Prov, which is there is a sort of, you know, it's mainly still in the academic field of people trying to do provenance for things like supply chain. Well, actually, funnily enough, it mainly, I think it came to the fore about the time of the BSE food scare. You know, that is the thing I'm buying, you know, beef or is it horse? It's kind of good to know. But in the widest sense, so is the thing that I have what it says it is? And this all actually goes back to the kind of stuff that Peter's been on about hashes and stuff, which I'm quite happy to just treat as something very technical and complicated that needs to be done. And there are people around who understand it. So it doesn't worry me that if it's not all immediately surfaced. But the thing that's really compelling is getting to this point where you have stuff that's sort of clean enough and reliable enough that you can start. Yeah, because here's the thing: if you have these lovely visualizations where rather than just being like a fixed infographic, you can actually, they have a degree of plasticity, you can do stuff with them. That's all well and good if you can work on the assumption that it's not just any old rubbish you're dealing with, because at some point you're going to start to invest ideas and belief in what you see coming out of it, which is why it does actually matter that what's underlying is something that most people have a reasonable degree of trust in. And yeah, rather like making the data set for the stuff that Adam's done, you know, it takes time at the moment.
Are we showing Adam's demo in this presentation at the end of the month?
Well, I don't see why not. But as I say, if it has a problem, it's nothing to do with what's there. It's whether people can see for themselves how it reflects what might be. I did occur to me, I don't know, I suppose. Here's a thought. I possibly might be. I have to see if I could actually rewrite the data set as BibTeX. Probably not impossible. Pain in the bum, but it might just be worth it, just to stop the odd tire kicker coming around and say, "Oh, it's not what I expected it to be." Because you will get, it's just the nature of people. You will get someone who said, "It's not exactly what you described, therefore it's all rubbish." Big sigh, but you know, we have to deal with it.
Can I throw in a quick thing? I don't want to interrupt, but I should have raised my hand. Continue. I'll bring it up later.
No. I'd come to an end. So.
Oh. Okay. I've got a. Well, so on the topic of a demo, and even what you mentioned earlier about when you showed the timeline interface and said, well, that's not visual meta, right? Okay. You can imagine that's going to be a reaction many people can make. Yeah. This is just to start a conversation, see what you think. When I think about how visual meta could be made poignant to someone who's not familiar with it, I think about something like a VS Code environment, where as I start to put in information, say in the meta itself, I get drop-down suggestions the way that you would for code. But in this case, it could be cross-corpus information, right? So I'm making a link to something and now I'm seeing a reference to something else that's in the ACM, but I'm actually like, I'm building out the meta layer. So it's not like an interface. It's not an end user experience. It's the writing of the visual meta itself within the, at the end of the PDF, but it's made a little easier because I'm not having to figure everything out myself. And I don't know if that makes any sense, but yeah, something similar to code injection or a plugin that not only helps you along with how to format this JSON, but also helps you with, and maybe like a cheat code, but yeah, with what's actually in the content or what is adjacent to the content, the other articles that would be considered similar in this corpus or something. I don't know if that makes any sense, but and maybe I'm drawing on the spirit of Codex here, because that may be what I'm thinking about is being similar, but almost in a visual studio environment.
Alan, if I
yeah.
can ask, are you almost envisioning this would be like a recommended reading? So you have been looking into quantum physics and you've read a series of articles on this. The visual meta is kind of prompting you with a similar article or publication.
I think that's a fair analogy. Yeah. And it's similar to Adam's interface, but sort of flipped on its head, right? Where in the interface, you'd be clicking on a date or a topic, and it would highlight other articles that are similar. This would almost be doing that, but within a drop down or a sort of a, do you want to add this into this visual meta that you're coding up yourself, right? Are these articles in fact related? Because you started typing, machine learning, and now there are these 3 other articles that say machine learning here that have already been coded up. Do you want to link to them or into their precise, either the article itself or the part in the article? I'm not expressing it very well, but thank you, Brendan. That's closer. Some mix of that might be. I just know that when we're talking about protocol layers or formats like this, there's something about typing it yourself that kind of like makes the mind get it, that it's not just a clever interface or, that we're selling an interface, that it's like, oh, this is a format. I'm beginning to see, and no, I didn't mean to disperse you at Adam by saying a clever interface. It's an awesome interface, but like people go like, well, I don't need another interface. We're trying to say, this is the format to focus on. Here's the potential.
So,
well, I think, but the interesting thing, isn't it? The interesting thing about this interface is they're so unlike what you've seen before. Why should you have to start with a list that's in page order or something?
Absolutely.
Why can't you start with a subject of interest? I mean, I think, the wider sense of recommendation and stuff that way is challenged mainly by the state of AI and machine learning and understanding semantics. It's not impossible, but I mean, I see it as fundamentally something that is entertained by this sort of structural.
I'm fully in on that. In fact, kind of where this is coming from is that, and maybe this links back to the post or the Twitter thread of other timelines. The tendency is to see these beautiful interfaces and go like, yeah, why don't we have this? And then the next question is, oh, it's because I don't know how to contribute to it, right? I don't know what else to do with this. And so if there was a way to say, hey, you can be part of this interface by doing this thing over here, maybe that makes a different story, because I've seen a lot of these attempts and then they look great, and then next week you're onto something else because you can't contribute to it.
Well, you've hit on a really interesting point, and one that I think is sort of challenging to a lot of collaborative systems. So what I did, a lot of my thesis work was looking at Wikipedia, and the one thing that they don't do is share, not in a meaningful sense. People share in principle, but you touch my shit and it all kicks off. So actually it's lots of silos, and it needn't be. So, so people are happy with the guy who might go around and fix apostrophes, which, you know, if you know how to do it, is a good thing. But it's not so happy about maybe someone who is good at seeing the overview across a whole subject and sort of would suggest, well, why don't you just connect this up and cut this article a different way? And suddenly you're fiddling with other people's stuff.
Yeah.
So, you know, making the space and making the trust space to say, oh, look, you have a skill we can really use. You have an understanding of this aspect, this wonderful whole data domain that somebody else doesn't have. And let's use that. Let's encapsulate that, you know,
Yes.
which is, a, you know, perhaps an overly glass half full way of looking at it. But I mean, I think that's an open door to be yet pushed on in collaborative work. But I did think of one other thing. When you start out and you talk about, you know, what can we see? One thought is thinking, you know, so, well, when you see those visualizations, how do I describe that to, I don't know, a room full of sociologists or a room full of historians?
That's what I would.
Who won't care? Who will have no immediate sort of sense of the technical aspect. That won't excite them per se.
Yeah.
So I still feel that one of the things we need to think about is doing that thing that's at the other end of the sort of technical, non-technical spectrum, is saying what this actually means, all this weird techie stuff we're talking about, what it actually means for you is, you know, insert description here. And I don't know quite what that is.
That was going to be my next question of two things. The first one is, what would be an analogy to visual meta? And what are maybe two examples that are closely related to visual meta in any point in history? So were index cards used in libraries a comparison to visual meta back in the day, for example? Because it was a way of maybe structuring extra content that the librarians found on the books, and they added to these index cards so that when other librarians saw those cards, they could find more information about the contents of the book or the author or the topic, things like that. So what are some of these analogies that we can use for visual meta?
Do you not, is it more not a juxtaposition of the fact of index cards as opposed to no index cards? Because it's not the thing per se, it's what it builds upon. So it's kind of, well, imagine if you had no index cards in the library. Imagine how difficult that is.
Yes.
So this in a sense is not
great.
It's an improvement sort of affordance. It's not doing anything in the sense, I mean, you know, undersell it, but it's not really doing anything particularly new. Well, what it's trying to do is it's trying to increase the degree of affordance offered by the information we have.
So can we say that, I'm trying to come up with something like here, but it's the equivalent of saying like the web is a library without index cards, without librarians, and then you know, visual meta helps bring order to or structure, at least structure, not order, but structure to.
I see where we're going with that. I think that might cause some people to dissent because the web takes you much wider into anything you can stick on the web. And to a certain extent, at this point, the commonsensical use of visual meta is in structured things. So, well, we've started in terms of academia and citable works, but I can totally see in engineering or in law or something structural medicine, you know, those areas of public endeavor that have a lot of structure to them. Whereas if I don't know, you know, so, but if I'm say working in a well, no, not perhaps an architect, but I'm, you know, working in a design studio. Does it have such, you know, does this sort of structure so easily mesh with something that's often quite sort of mental and approach? I don't know. So I would tie it more to areas of the web or areas of our writing and production that have and need to have structure. So part of it is citational, whether it's formal academic citation or the fact that I need to know what standard BS 123 is, you know, so my building does not fall down. So I think that's the probably a more fruitful thing to lean on. I think
Got
going
it.
wider into the web space, you get into sort of things like personal blogs or something, and it's sort of, I think the metaphor begins to break down because that's much more free form, and indeed it should be.
Okay. Anybody want to chip in?
Yeah, I threw in a couple of just breadcrumbs from the historian perspective, the academic. I think the most immediate carrot is that they can, by using this tool, come up with or discover fresh insights, even if it's something that someone has thought of decades ago that is somehow similar to what they're working on. If they can see that and quickly, then it's immediately it's love at first sight, right? A way to navigate all of this. And so I think that's a big appeal of visual meta. It's a different story entirely to pull that off, because it almost requires that you have a large amount of encoded data, right? So then I was just thinking about other ones. Another idea, this is a bit of a stretch, I don't even know if this is like the point of visual meta per se, but right now you have PDFs and you make a copy of it, you can edit it or whatever, and then you pass it along in email. And then so now you have like 10 different versions of the same PDF, and it's a nightmare. I don't know if visual meta, I don't know if that's even really still a problem. But it seems like with visual meta, you could have different collaborators, and they're adding.
Do you mean kind of in a breadcrumb kind of way, Alan?
I mean, you send me a PDF and I highlight a couple things, and then I save it and send it back to you or on to someone else. And now that's actually a different copy, right? Copy of the PDF versus, and you can get rid of yours and save mine, but that's version control, I guess is what I'm getting at. If the that's only, yeah, that's not a complete idea.
Well, there are sort of three different elements, I think, of this sort of versioning thing. There's a sort of almost like the historical, like dealing with old manuscripts, and you've got 50 copies of them, but that's what's past looking. So it's not changing, but there's this whole ecosystem of things that are sensitive, could all be called the same document, but have variations within. There's a more dynamic thing when you're doing collaborative work, where you, for instance, in a sense, are commenting on a draft. Whether it's a diagram, whether it's visual or whether it's purely textual, where you're working maybe towards a finished end. And then there's another aspect, which is just that getting closer to almost the citational thing is just where you've got 5 copies of this sort of citation, but it's been refined over time, or somebody's added some extra keywords, or someone's fixed a typo. Now, I think hashing of the type that Jerry and Peter have discussed, which I sort of pretend to half understand, but I sort of can see how that can cope with that. So, in a sense, there is a technical affordance, and these exist, that can be done to deal with that. So, in a sense, the rest of us can worry about just having fun with the bits we understand. But they're sort of different things. I suppose the hardest one is sort of it's a collaborative thing, which sort of manifests itself in the world of Word as something like track changes, or what we're doing in a PDF, which is a different sort of versioning, because in a sense it's versioning within versioning, because eventually that document will become arguably at some point a canonical document. Well, this is one of the arguments I had when I was working with people up in government, trying to get them to understand that at some point you stop fiddling with this thing in Google Cloud, and you decide, yes, that's the one we actually sent, to the repository as this copy of the law or something. And it's terribly easy to lose sight of that if anything's arguably editable forever and a day. And that sort of tracking gets very rich and has to be quite localized. But I think for the sort of citable things that we're talking about, I think it's it's believable to be able to have a sort of hashing regime where you can sort of say that within the things that we call this, there are many versions, and the way they track down is like this, and and in amongst them will be, well, this is said to be the cleanest version of what represents this, and there are others will differ for various purposes. They might have all sorts of annotations in them, but they are not they're not the central document. They're not the thing that describes the original thing.
Right.
Which is probably the main thing to a certain extent that underpins the sort of visualizations we're wanting to do, because in that sort of thing, you're not worried about whether there are 16 copies of Bloggs's paper on astrophysics or something. You're interested to know there is a thing on this subject, and it relates as a singular form, relates to all these other things. And the wonderful of forms is it breaks you out of the sort of citation fixation that I see that just strikes me as the Stalinist theory of art. This thing has to be good because everyone cited it. And I'm a cynic. My immediate reaction is bollocks. Because the world doesn't work like that. I'll go read it and decide,
Yeah.
And I found this thing that's equally interesting, and I don't care that nobody else has cited it because I'm jolly well going to. And I, so another thing that I think this sort of data structure allows for, because it allows for these explorational views, it allows for, it may be breaking a few people's rice bowls personally rather than organizationally, but that's probably not a bad thing. But I think it's going to make things more discoverable and make for a much richer interchange and use of knowledge.
You have the most flowerful language. It may break some people's rice bowls. It's just really...
Sorry, British term, but yes, change has a cost, basically.
I wouldn't say racist. Anyway, I am back. I'm at the cabin. As you can see, lots of woods. Clearly, it's a cabin, right? I apologize again for today. What I put in the link thing and the chat thing and the username password is Lisa from Sheridan has given us 4 documents to comment on by Monday.
Yep.
So if you can all download or whatever, or even just one of them, because the visual meta is essentially the same on all of them. And what she's done is, it's not 2-point, it's quite a bit larger, but also the intro text of visual meta they haven't commented or edited. I think we need to do that together. I have it as a placeholder text, but we clearly don't want anything not brilliant there, right?
Yes, and we should note that I think we're looking at pre-published stuff for Hypertext 21, so we should all regard it as sort of stuff in, commercial in confidence, as it were, because it's not actually formally published yet. Lest that not be self-evident.
Yeah, do not distribute. So what's that, security clearance, burn before reading?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Frode, I was getting some notes for, you're going to be delivering a presentation at ACM at the end of the month, right? Do you know how long you have?
This is all a bit up in the air. The glorious organizers who are giving us this opportunity have not been in touch very much. Obviously, summer holiday, plus they've been very busy. So I don't know the details. I expect that Vint and I will have the stage for 10-15 minutes. That's what it looks like so far.
Okay.
So I think half of that should be, this is great, this is why, and then at the end, this is what it actually is. I don't know, what do you guys think?
Yeah, I got some notes. It's important to say, to tell what it is and why it's important in the beginning. And then the first, we talked about showcasing a little bit of the first implementation where you guys are going to be starting at. But then leave room for the future possibilities of future of text, how it might evolve or how it will look like a couple of years down the line, right? And then people are going to have a lot of questions, which is normal. So then It would be nice for us to have an FAQ on the website that we can link people to the FAQ.
Yeah, this presentation is on Visual Meta, not on Future of Text, though.
No, yeah, exactly. On
Oh,
Visual
okay.
Meta. Yeah, this is all about Visual Meta.
But we now have an FAQ on Visual Meta, and we should definitely add to it. But
Yes.
can we look at one of these sample PDFs together?
Which one do you want to look at?
Might want to take it off recording.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. Who is doing?
Yeah,
Actually, I'll edit it later. I'll just cut it off later.
I can pause it right now.
Okay, so this is not relevant, but what is relevant for the beginning here? I'm just going to go back to see what it looks like. Oops, I closed it. Sorry, this must be really annoying to look at. Right, so if we look at this bit here is what we need to edit together. So I've copied that over. Actually, I'll just do it like this. Right. Can you all see that relatively comfortably?
Where are we?
Yeah.
Desktop. Okay, well, I've just scraped the actual, I'm just dropping this in the sidebar. I've just scraped the actual self-site out of each of the visual metas and put it in the sidebar as a single text.
Nice.
So it's not the whole verbiage of the VM, because that should be constant for all of them. I can check that later, but the meat, the bit that's different per item is.
But let's go, Mark. Let's go through that afterwards, because that is
sure. No, it's just for others who don't have the docs.
Okay. Right. So, yeah, if you can all just read this on this screen or whatever, and just comment, so we edit it, make sure we're happy with it, and then I lock it up.
It did occur to me, thinking sort of it's in and around this from the ACM meeting, it may well be that some publishers want to slip an extra paragraph or something. I don't think that really matters if it clarifies what they think they're doing or what some of their special usage means. And I don't think we need to be too sort of purist about that, as long as the bit that's canonical is always there.
Yeah.
If publishers want to put a bit of extra secret sauce in, even if only to sort of
justify. Mark, I've invited them like mad to do this. Cool. So far. Yeah. Okay. They want us to do the work, but yes, sure. Absolutely. Yeah.
So we're reading this to see if it is, for clarity, or what exactly are you hoping?
Correctness, clarity, politicalness, that it doesn't offend anyone. That kind of stuff. I'm just breaking up, try to the logic, and then we put it back together.
Who is this for? Who is the reader here? It's not really clear. Some of it seems to be to the writer of Visual Meta, and some to a reader, and some to the publisher. So could we specify the actual reader a bit more?
The reader is probably two types of readers. One is a student who is in this field, sees this at the back of the document, realize, oh, I can do this and this and this with it, and it goes off what you and Mark did, Adam. That's one. The actual user of the data. The point of this is a little bit to explain what the visual meta is, but also to help them, and my favorite phrase, derive value from it. So the second reader is reading this in 500 years, come across a document, no one knows visual meta, it's like, is that what it is? And they run machine learning or AI, whatever it is, and boom, they get the stuff out of it. So it's an explanation.
If I understand Adam right, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think what's suggesting is almost to say that, if you're reading this or if you're creating this, and literally make it explicit so that it is explicit. The thing is, we've all been talking about this for quite some time. Most of the people who are going to be reading this will be reading it for the first time and will come with none of that knowledge behind them. So it may be useful to do something that may, to those who understand it, seem incredibly pedestrian, but sometimes, saying actually what is in the tin can be helpful.
Yeah, but I mean, I completely agree. We have to make sure we write the right thing for the right people, but I still think it is for anybody who doesn't necessarily have access to check the domain because we may have been dead for a couple hundred years. Or it may be someone in a part of the world where they don't feel they can email us for whatever reason. So it literally is the first part, this thing I've selected, I'm going to delete, that looks useless. The first paragraph really should just say what it is in as neutral a tone as possible. And then we
Sorry.
should have should we have something like to make your own or to use this? Because that's what the next bit is, right?
Is this the equivalent of like the fine print that's gonna be attached to anything that uses
Yeah,
visual
it's the
meta?
minimal fine print that ostensibly, hopefully, if nothing else, will get those who want to engage with it more to push off and, you know, find the deep detail.
Okay, and
but
is it gonna
otherwise,
be-
all you'd see is some formatted information, which is the bit now you see on screen, the bit after those paragraphs. So the idea here is just something.
Yeah, I guess I just want to make it explicit like that. I can't tell whether this is an example of what an abstract should be, or if this is going to be the content that's going to be packaged along in every instance of visual meta.
Every aspect of visual meta, this is not an abstract. This is, okay, let me, thank you for asking the difficult questions. Hang on. You Zoom people are.
I need the dumbest version possible though.
Yeah, of course. Just because we're the least.
We
dumb
could put
person.
it in a Dunning-Kruger section.
Dunning-Krugers would just think they know better already, so it's a bit pointless. Right, so this is, to clarify, and also for you, Brandon, this is visual meta right here. There is an appendix, as in a heading. That's what it should be. She didn't do that. She just has it in bold, but it's okay. It's not too tiny. I don't want to bicker with Lisa. But the idea is that something says what it is. And then there is a bunch of introductory text. That's what we're talking about now. Then we go into the different sections with the different data bits. So this initial bit here, which I made here, is just, I've been reading more and more about the very early days of books because I want to understand why academic publishing today is so completely messed up. And one of the things that I see is some of the early books, printed books, they had to explain how to read the book. Like a read me first, like we have in the 80s in computers. This is a read me. This is what it is. So the way we have encoded this data, and which oops.
I think a useful thing and something that came out of the ACM conversation is because we got the inevitable question is, well, why aren't you using RDF or XMP or something? To which the answer is, well, the number of people on the planet who can read that without their brain exploding is vanishingly small.
I don't think this is a page for justification, Mark. It's just
no. What you're grasping firmly the wrong end of the stick here. The point being is just to explain we're doing. One of the reasons for doing this is that it is actually readable. So it is sort of normally hidden information that is readable, because that partly explains why we're even doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah.
Afraid I have to jump. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, it's been good. I hope, Alan, next week I'll be normal and we can discuss further.
Hopefully, I want to help out where I can for these documents. So if this is available, let me know. Have a great weekend otherwise.
Yeah, okay. See you later, Alan.
Indeed.
Thanks for being here.
Pleasure, Alan.
Bye. Peter's not here today, is he? Have you heard anything more?
No, I have been corresponding with him in the sidelines. I'm probably busy. I know sort of parents have been keeping him busy when ailments various. So that's probably what's going on.
Okay.
In the first line, this is what we call visual meta. Should we say that it's a code? The following code is we call visual meta or something like that.
Let me add it here, maybe, in the style of, maybe like that.
Except that I suspect the person that needed that description wouldn't know what BibTeX is. It's more that what follows
but-
this textual
Yeah,
description, that
No,
the,
no,
the,
but
the
Mark, they
code
could-
below is what we call visual meta.
But Mark, they could look it up.
But they won't. People don't
No,
trust
no,
me.
but if they're at all interested in this meta-looking stuff, because don't forget, when they do scroll down, it'll have the name of the document. All of that stuff will be there.
No, I understand that. I don't know what saying that, but what I was just answering Raphael's point that I think was well made. It's just say at the opening, instead of saying this is what we call in other words, this, instead of saying this is the code below is what we call visual meta. And then you explain what the visual meta is. But that explains
Is this what you wanted?
Raphael, am I understanding you
Yeah.
correctly?
Yeah, that would make sense because the following you're about to see is this what we're explaining.
Yeah.
The encoded code below is what we call visual meta. There's an approach to add information about a document to the document itself, comma, just for clarity, on the same level of the content in the style of BibTeX,
Yeah.
in brackets, because it's not.
I probably put encoded information rather than encoded code because it's sort of.
And then does the data layer you mentioned, is it auto referring to this specific visual meta entry? Because
It's
if
an
I'm
example of what we call visual meta.
if I'm reading this in a digital file, it makes sense because the same would be necessary on a physical printed page. If I'm reading this on a physical printed page, what is the data layer? So then does it?
Yeah, but that's the thing. There is no different. First of all, Raphael and Mark, the data below is what we call visual meta. That's clear, isn't it?
Yes.
Right. Okay. So the same would be okay. God, isn't it incredible how difficult this is to say the most basic thing?
Simplicity is hard.
Yes.
I guess the only, so when you say as opposed to a data layer, are
I
you
think we can
referring
delete
back to the
this.
first-
We don't need that, do we?
Yeah, I don't think we do.
Okay.
There is some curly bracket visual meta start in right below your cursor.
Adam, how are you
Down,
adding text
right,
to your
right.
screen? What are you using to add text to your webcam?
Magic.
Is this the future
like-
of text, Adam? Are you using the future
It
of
is,
text?
but we're discussing visual meta instead. I have so many prototypes I want to show you. This is handmade. This is actually a web page with 3-dimension. Now it's not in 3D, but Frode is boring me with visual meta. I can't show my prototypes.
These are
I want-
ideas just bleeding out of your brain, in other words.
Yeah, I can animate that one as well, but we're doing this instead.
Yeah,
But I'm
sorry.
waiting. I'm waiting. For
Okay,
the-
fine. Let's finish this and do the fun stuff. Fine. Right. Okay. Where is the bracket thing?
We should have one line above. You have an opening bracket and an @ sign.
Yeah, I think that goes, doesn't it?
Yep. We should have future Fridays where we don't talk visual meta or anything, where we really talk about the cool stuff, because Frode has so many interesting things that he only posts on Twitter, and then we can't discuss it on the.
Is it a
on the
happy
meetings.
text hour?
It was actually.
Yeah, happy text hour. They're good.
It was
Like augmented
actually for
text
a
again.
while. It was split for a while, but because of the ACM, that's why we're spending, our Friday evenings on this stuff. I really look forward to the pilot being in the work, so we can do exactly what you're saying, Adam. This is really eating grits to get us energy. This right. Okay. Let me not make it worse by going on about it.
I love thinking
The
like,
first looks could be locates, halfway along the first line of the paragraph, because you've got
To
looking.
parse the
looks
visual
twice.
meta, reader software looks for visual.
Locates, well, you've got looking twice, that's all. It's sort of, and you've got looks again in the,
Yeah. But okay.
it doesn't matter, it just.
No. It does, because to parse the visual meta, reader software looks for visual meta in the PDF by scanning from.
Yes, yeah,
Yeah. Okay. Document from the back, from the end of the back, from the end
the end, yeah.
for the text visual meta end. If this is found, the software then looks for visual meta start and uses the data found these between these marker tags. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to call
Could
this
you-
tag then.
Could you put the at visual meta end in a slightly different font or different emphasis or something, just to show that, rather than put quotes around it? In other words, that is literally what you look for,
No.
because people will misread that.
No,
Absolutely.
because this, I think, has to be really, really simple, one type, because production-wise, I think.
Okay, yeah, no, fair enough. Yeah, okay, I buy that. Yeah, okay, yeah, no, fair enough. Yep, no.
that part, it is important to make clear, should that go up before when listing the names of authors or after? Because you give me a bunch of examples of wrappers and then you tell me that it should be based on wrappers. So I feel like that should come before that whole paragraph. Nice.
Second paragraph, third line, there should be a lowercase f after the colon.
Oh, F off.
And I'm looking for that summer 2021 because it's currently winter here. So
Oh, am I being polarists?
Hemispherist.
Hemispherist. Hang on. So where's this effing F?
Second paragraph, line 3, second word.
Oh, this one.
Yeah, because it's following a colon.
Medal for being anal goes to.
Yeah, well,
Okay,
Unhelpful.
so basically, we're only telling them two things for parsing. We're not telling them anything else. We're not giving them any of the rules for how to do the VMID or anything like that.
because I think, as you said, I mean, you've got the problem that either you start writing a tome in there, or we say, we point them to where to find it. You have actually mentioned at the top, it's that the citational data is in BibTeX, which, until it's changed to something else in the future, would presumably be a findable, format.
It's just going to copy this type. I think it's actually useful.
And now worry, Adam now has no thoughts. I don't know if that's more worrying.
No thoughts, yes. I
Empty
think I'm
bubble.
done, actually. Visual meta ID is the visual meta ID. VMID is the visual meta ID, which starts with the oh God, I've written date on the other side. Date and time the documents metadata visual meta was created in
You might just start by saying a key concept of visual meta is that every citation has a unique ID. And then you describe what you've described, because otherwise we have an ID, but it's not clear why we have an ID. Some people will guess, sadly, lots won't. So you have to kind of say it. Yeah.
document type. This was you will see it below anyway.
Yeah, and to be honest, I'm sure that format won't necessarily, will change over time. But there's no need to go into that. I think it's perfectly fair to say at this point at the time we write it, that's the expectation. As this matures, I'm sure all sorts of things will, duly change.
This was written September, okay? Will it be September by the way we publish it? Yeah.
Yeah.
There you go, Raphael.
This
No
was
more summer.
Yeah.
You're missing a
Well,
word.
it's not September down there. What is it?
No.
July?
No.
Or January?
You're missing a word. What does it mean? This was September 2021.
Oh, missing. Oh, okay. Yeah.
In
So,
September,
In September.
unless you're using American English.
I don't need to have the
Never
email.
mind.
All right. This is good, right? Yes, Brendan.
No,
Oh,
it's
good-
Adam's
Goodbye,
got
Adam.
head off.
Oh,
Bye.
okay.
Good to
Yep.
see
See
you.
you later, Mr. Swede.
Be well.
Come over to Bergen. I know it's near right now, but
I'm
resist.
gonna have to leave in 9 minutes.
okay. I think we're almost done anyway. And then we'll have fun when Adam goes. We'll go into experimental stuff. That's my plan. Right. Okay. This is okay, right, guys?
It reads well to me, and I have the least amount of knowledge on this entire thing, although I admittedly have dug through your documentation. Makes sense.
No,
Thank
that
you.
helps a lot actually, because the classic thing is, the hardest thing is to write down what you understand. You tell
Exactly.
what's not clear.
I think that's the definition of a PhD right there. Should we add these things?
Oh right, yeah. If you want to roll it up.
Oops. Raphael's just marveling at the topographical quality of it all.
Yes, it's great. I love it. If only people knew these things existed as well.
Oh, you could go really old school and take all the spaces out, so you have to read it out loud to find out what it means.
Gutenberg
That would have to
have
start
liked
with
that.
friends, Romans. Okay, I'm going to take this over here. Okay. Hi, Lisa. Thank you for this.
I need to record the sound because when I'm typing, it's
Um,
I actually took a touch typing class so many years ago. It was one of the best things that I've done.
I'm embarrassed.
I
to
was
say
sitting-
I have too. It had no effect on me whatsoever. sadly.
I was sitting in a Starbucks in San Francisco one night doing my hunting and pecking.
Yeah.
And a guy behind me says, "What? You don't touch type?" Something like that. And I looked up to see if it was any of my friends. It was nobody I knew. And it had the psychological effect. Okay, if some stranger can say it, maybe I should get a little bit of a, that was weird.
Too bad I learned before I found out about the Dvorak layout, because it makes so much more sense. But now I can't switch because my brain is already hardwired to QWERTY. And
That's how I feel too.
yeah.
So now I just put it on the blog just to have it a thing on the blog.
Nice.
See, you should have come in the next night to the Starbucks with your manual typewriter. Put that on the table.
So back to the other fun stuff.
Yeah.
I think what I'm going to do is be very, very clever and offload the entirety of this work to you, Mark.
Yeah, I can immediately see. I mean, there is some stuff that doesn't particularly matter. So for instance, there are some typographic quotes in the last line of the abstract. They're not, to be honest, it's not the end of the world. It won't break anything. If you use that in BibTeX, those quotes just wouldn't render because LaTeX doesn't know how to deal with curly quotes. But it doesn't break anything. It's fine. So what I can do is I'll make some notes for Lisa, say, look, you know, fine stuff. But frankly, if it costs money to fix at this stage, don't bother. Because an errata, you know, the whole point of having errata is this stuff can be driven out in due course. And I'd much rather we weren't having to think through the issue.
So Mark, you're going to send an email to Lisa pointing out only
through those. I will go through the 4 self sites and just look for any egregious errors.
Yeah, but anything that says this may be an issue, you don't say anything, right? You don't say this is an issue, however. If you need to use the word however, you don't write it. You only say
no, exactly. No, I'll just look for anything that I actually think is a real break. Yeah. I think have I got Lisa's address?
Should we still be recording? And just, I don't know if in the recording you should blur out the emails.
Oh, they're not, okay. There's only 2.
Yeah, I've got.
And Lisa
I've
down
got
there
Lisa's.
in the text.
Well, we'll have to do
I've
some
got
cropping with
Lisa's
this
address.
recording.
Okay.
Well, you can crop this at the end. Yeah.
But superficially looking, there's nothing major already, right?
Yeah. So I'll try and keep the comments down to about 8 size minimum. So you cracked a smile. Yes. My first scan, it looked pretty clean because we pushed around enough on this enough.
I'm sending this.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Okay. So then I have a question about the email that some of you have seen.
Yep.
I think one of the fields, let me just open these again and not just annoy you with clickety click. Right. So in many of these, the authors put their email addresses up, right? Yeah, like here.
Mm-hmm.
So we already have in Visual Meta a field for affiliation, email address, and all of that stuff. So if we do that, the thing we've discussed on and off the last few months, if I'm reading this and I want to reply, so in a reader software, if it becomes standard, you do Command R, just like an email. All it does is open a new word processing document. And when you are finished, you can then click share to original author. So you can publish it however you want, but you also have the email address of the author to go to the author. And in the Visual Meta, there is a tag that says in reply to, and then the VM ID of that document. Wouldn't that help? Like the discussions, like especially Mark and Peter have been writing long things for this. Wouldn't that help us to build a book rather than a kind of an email chain?
In certain, I think the thing is, it's fine to have the affordance for it. Whether, I mean, if I'm replying to something that's written 40 years ago, the chances are that, well, they didn't have email then, but the sort of the email affordance is quite recent, which is one of the reasons people are now using things like ORCID in the academic sense. But I don't see any, I don't see any reason wrong with it. Of course, in your immediate use case, which is, pedagogic sort of student teacher, I doubt most students will be writing to the paper's author, but I've got nothing against it. I'm just not sure that you necessarily need to do this, given that you're spending money on the engineering.
Yeah, I just thought it would actually be useful for us because one thing but thank you for that concern, because spending anyway, because at some point in author, I'm going to have to change the export page. It's a bit of a mess at the moment. At the moment, it's like this. It's okay, but it doesn't really have a Raphael approved kind of a design overview. Not that this one has either, by the way. But I think that, Raphael, if you don't mind helping me make this clean, that could help.
It'll, like, just quickly looking at it, it looks pretty clean. Just a couple of details we can look together.
Yeah, I think there are. Yeah, yes. Shut up, Mark. Anyway, but one of the things is what would be easy is if you do here and you click on changing the author detail, click edit, it opens the preferences where you have the information. To add your email address here, if you want it to be included, that's just another field for Jacob. That's easy. I think the interaction thing, and this is what I'm really excited to talk to you guys about, is this document that I've now written, which is a response to another document. How do I know that? I may forget. I may write it over a weekend. You know, where should that be in gray at the end? Should it be part of the name, etc.?
You could approach it two ways. One is you could have it as a sort of start thing that, in essence, when you create a document, you can either just sort of whiz through a thing where you might record your intention, what the document, its purpose, what it's doing. And then that same information could also just be part of the metadata of the properties of the document that you could either fill in later or, you know, sort of go to later if you didn't want to do it at the start, or you needn't do it at all.
I gotta go, Frode. I have another meeting to go to.
Good to see you. I think we're done with Visual Meta for a while, so on Monday we can jump into other waters.
All right, I will stop recording and I'll send you the video later.
Thank you very much. See you later. Have a good weekend,
Nice
Rafael.
weekend. Bye-bye.
Bye.